Raider Nation, what's good? Jesse Merrick here. Welcome into another episode of the Silver and Black Sports Network podcast. On today's show, we're catching up with Jason Horowitz, the radio voice of the Raiders, to dive into what's next for the Silver and Black, now that they've actually moved on from Chip Kelly. We also take a look back at the last handful of years to explain why the Raiders are in this position right now and what they need to do going forward in order to finally get this franchise moving in the right direction. It's a good conversation with Jason there. Plus, we're turning the page and looking ahead to the second and final matchup of the year against the LA Chargers. To help me do that, I'm bringing in the homie Chris Hayre. If you're a Raiders fan from LA, you probably know him. He's a sports anchor at CBS out there in LA and also hosts the Chargers Weekly podcast as well. Great dude. I had a lot of fun talking with him. He and I take a deep dive into the Chargers, analyzing where they're at coming out of the bye week. We explain where their biggest holes are and how the Raiders can try to take advantage of them, specifically where Greg Olsen and company can thrive against that Chargers defense. There's some holes there. We also explain what's ailed their offense in recent weeks as well. All that and more coming your way on today's show, and we'll get it all rolling with our interview with Jason Horowitz first. But before we get there, go to silverandblacksportsnetwork.com. You can actually get there by clicking the link above and subscribe to our free Raiders newsletter, and also subscribe to us here on YouTube or wherever it is that you're listening to us. It's a great way to support the growth of our channel for free. There's no better deal in sports. All right, so with that, let's get it rolling, guys. All right, Jason, we're back and rolling now. Look, we were talking, it's been a rough season for the Raiders. Obviously, everybody knows that. They're sitting at 2-9. At this point, on the heels of firing Chip Kelly, how do you kind of wrap your head around the way the season has gone thus far?
Oh, it's been a massive disappointment, for everybody involved. It has been, and I'm a big believer in that life is about expectations, and that's kind of how we set ourselves up for how we judge what you're doing. And the expectation coming into this season was you bring in some known commodities. Pete Carroll's a known commodity. He's a Hall of Fame caliber coach, college and pro. And Geno Smith, the last few years, is a somewhat known commodity. And you kind of know you're gonna score and you're gonna move the ball. And you draft Ashton Genty, and Chip Kelly had some NFL successes, some struggles, and then college obviously successes, and they paid him a ton of money. So the expectation was going to be that this team was going to be competitive. They'd be better, particularly offensively, because last year it was 13 out of 17 games where they scored 20 or less. And the reality is it has been actually a lot worse.
Yeah.
And I think that makes that expectation, because of that expectation, that makes this feeling of the season that much worse. And it's been hard. Honestly, I mean, not that our job is hard or taxing or anything like that. It's all perspective-based, but it's been hard. The fan base is rightfully very disappointed and frustrated with how bad it has looked.
Yeah, no, look, that's a fair thing to say. Like, again, our jobs are great. We are very fortunate to do what we do. But
yeah.
It is tough.
I'm sitting in my kitchen working.
Exactly. And that's the thing. Is like day in and day out, it is still tough to go in there, just like the players, and deal with the losses over and over again. Even if we are removed from the situation a bit, it's just, people aren't happy, obviously, and so it's tough when you're not around people that aren't happy, especially hyper-competitive people that want to win, and it's just not quite working out for them. So, look, the big question, I have is, like, what was your biggest issue with the way things were called with Chip Kelly, and what do you want to see differently now with Greg Olsen?
Well, it's a couple of different things, right? Because, like, if you go back, so again, perspective, right? 11 games this team has played. And if you think about during this losing streak, but even before that, like, what has been the frustration? The frustration has been a lot of this season. Why didn't Ashton get the ball more during the course of the game? Why hasn't there been consistent running attack? Why, that was the initial frustration. And now more recently, it's like, well, why aren't you protecting or finding ways to protect Geno Smith? Right? We just gave up 10 sacks. Like, Geno he just tied the record with Jeff George, I believe, for most sacks on one quarterback in Raiders history. And and the answer is, yeah, you need to help, but then who are you throwing to, right? So, like, if you're, there are a bunch of plays, and maybe, and I'm not developed, Jesse, you played college football as a wide receiver, so you're probably much more appropriate to talk about route concepts and trees and all of that stuff. But, like, if you're keeping in a tight end to help block Myles Garrett on one side, and you probably need to keep a running back in because they're just dumb, especially when they're blitzing, and they blitzed a lot. So if that's what you're doing, right? That's 6. Gino's the 7th. Your running back's the 8th. You only have 3 guys who can go out for routes.
Yeah.
And so, and 2 of your receivers are rookies who can't get on the field. Dante Thornton has 2 catches the last 8 games. Jack Besh is seeing an average of like 8 to 12 snaps a game. And, we were going to talk about that separately, but who are you throwing to? Yeah. Trey Tucker's a good receiver, but he's not a dynamic number 1. And Tyler Lockett is at this point in his career kind of what he is, and he's a checked out, serviceable guy. And Gino made some good throws to him. But you have Brock, but if they're blitzing 6 and you've got 6 or 7 to protect, and then Gino's your 8th guy, that means they have 5 guys to cover 3 guys.
Yeah.
That's a lot to ask. So the obvious part to all this is it's not an easy fix. No. We do not have a good offensive line. We do not have good wide receivers that have shown at this point in their careers right now as a whole unit that they are capable of getting open consistently. Mm-hmm. And that makes it really hard. Now, what does that mean for Greg Olsen compared to Chip Kelly? They're going to have to show, I think, patience in the determination to run it, but they're going to have to figure out a way to run it differently. Last year the team was last in the NFL in rushing. We are towards the bottom in rushing again. And I don't know that this team with this offensive line is capable of running the ball well enough to really make anybody worry about it. And that's a problem.
No, it is. And that's the thing is I think a lot of fans have that perspective as well. Many of them looking ahead to next season, which look at 2-9 is completely understandable. We're still in it day to day, so we're taking this quote unquote week by week as it goes on and trying to analyze how they get better this week now against the Chargers. But I want to dive into it, and you kind of touched on it a bit there.
That's a tough thing in itself, though, Jesse. We're having our own changes, and Chip Kelly and the top offensive assistant are now gone. And a couple weeks ago, it was the special teams coordinator, and that was rough this weekend. That first return by the Browns, and it set up a bunch of different short kicks. But you're going up against the Chargers team that their last game before their break was an absolute blowout at the hands of the Jaguars.
Yeah.
So they are going to be just pissed coming out of the break to play a rival. Bad time. Yeah. In a building where we don't win.
Yeah, looking like they're getting a little healthier too. Obviously, they've struggled, protecting, and we'll dive into more of that later on here. But man, it is crazy. When I was going back and watching and looking at it, I'm like, God, the Raiders aren't catching a break here because of what they just came off of and heading into the bye. And now being able to sit back and be like, okay, let's look at all the issues we have. And by the way, the Raiders are sitting right in front of us for us to correct it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's rough. But you brought up something that I do want to get into, and just kind of a lack of talent in a lot of places. You know what I mean? That is obvious. It is clear. We're not breaking the news by talking about that. And it just goes back to a conversation I've had a lot about the fact that the 5 first-round picks from, around the Khalil Mack era trade and everything, which is obviously timely given the whole Chargers thing, but just overall as well, the history of draft picks in this recent years for this franchise have really been tough. And now I think that we're seeing the lack of productive picks or lack of picks panning out here displaying itself within this organization and out on the field.
So, it's not fair to directly compare and contrast players when they're because they're playing against each other, but we do it naturally. And, Ashton Genty's, everyone has their own belief on whether or not you draft a running back as high as we did. And I still think he has a chance to be Hall of Fame good. Yeah. But we see how many times he's able to break away from tackles, but you have to actually be able to get moving first. And that's an offensive line thing. But we just played the Cleveland Browns, and the opposite of us, where our draft picks in that conversation are not seeing the field, is that their draft picks are showing them why they believe that they can have a massive future turnaround. And whether it's Mason Graham and Carson Schlesinger and Quinshon Judkins and Harold Fannin and we'll put Shadur Sanders and Dylan Gabriel to the side, but then it's, a guy they signed in Isaiah Bond, who would have been a top 2-3 round draft pick had it not been for some sexual assault allegations that were later dropped after the draft. But he had that 52-yard catch. So they look at their draft picks and be like, wow, our future is bright if we get a quarterback. And whether or not Shadur is the guy, who knows? But that's what they think. But it's beyond that, right? It's some of the other players within the organization that are still there for the 6 to last 8 years because they drafted those guys in the top 3 rounds and they were really good. And it's Denzel Ward and it's Grant Delpit and it's Myles Garrett and it's Martin Emerson, who's not playing right now, but he's really good. And, it's Joel Bitonio, who's been a multiple Pro Bowl in the offensive line. And you look at really that, right? And the Chargers have some of that. It's not just Justin Herbert. And the Rams do that a lot. And we've seen that around the league. And then you look at the Raiders and you say, okay, who's been on this team for 4, 5, 6 years? And it's because they were drafted really well. And the answer is it's Max Crosby, it's Colton Miller, and it's a couple of other guys. But that's really it.
The only other
really
ones
just those guys.
Daniel Carlson and AJ Cole. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but they were drafted.
They've seen their struggles.
AJ was an undrafted free agent who won the battle. I think because he told me this story a couple of years ago that he was, and I'm not breaking news here, but I think he was working at like a financial company. He's like, guys, I'll be back in 4 weeks to save my job. And that, now he's making more money. But Carlson was drafted by the Vikings, remember? Yeah, a really good finance move. Yeah. Carlson was drafted by the Vikings, and he didn't have a good rookie season or few weeks, and he got cut. And he's been great for the Raiders until this year, and it's been a massive struggle. But he had, but he wasn't a Raiders draft pick.
No.
And you look around this entire two deep of who the Raiders play, and it's not just those 5 first-round picks you're talking about. It's the depth of drafts that the Raiders have had for a decade, with a whole host of different GMs and front offices and head coaches, and they've all failed.
Yeah.
They've all failed. And the one draft class that was pretty good, because you look at the team for the last couple of years before this, all those guys, you remember last year, Jesse, when we were in that 10-game losing streak, we would talk about how many players the Raiders are going to have to try and figure out how to sign, particularly on the defensive side, and they didn't re-sign any of them. No. Malcolm Kuntz was the only one they re-signed, and he's really struggling, right? But you look at those draft classes with, Nate Hobbs and Divine Diablo and Trayvon Merrick, who had a low blow last night against Shawan Jennings. And all of those guys, there was a whole host of players that they drafted in those mid to late rounds that were making an impact, and none of them are here anymore. But they're all playing elsewhere. And I think, that is the one draft class where you could say, okay, they did a good job. It hasn't been any other time, and that's it. That's part of the reason that you find yourself with the losing that this franchise is having.
Yeah, they got to find a way to draft well and keep them in-house. I mean, at the end of the day, and obviously that falls on Spytek's shoulders, going forward, and I think they need to allow him to do his job. The big question now is, obviously, the question isn't should they play, should the draft picks play. I think at this point, 2-11, they should. Do you think that they will?
I don't know, man. And like, so I think this gets back. Let's go to the offensive side of this, because this gets back to the conversation we were having about what do you have to do differently offensively.
Yeah.
The question is, could it get worse? And the answer is, it can always get worse. And I guess that's the other part to all this, right? Like, if they are actually worse in practice, and hypothetically then in games, than the current guys, what does that mean for the safety of your quarterback? And that's the other thing I'd be concerned about, right? Geno Smith, he's taken a lot of hits. Some of them are on him. A little bit of the 10 sacks were on him. But if you say he held the ball too much, again, that goes back to who's open, right? If you're bringing guys in and you still can't, and you're only sending 3 guys out and there's 5 guys defending, you got a major problem.
And to that point, just to butt in real quick here, too, when you go back and look at some of the tape, there's sometimes when Geno's in his drop, guys haven't turned around in their routes yet. Yes, you throw with anticipation a lot of different times, but there's too many times when Geno's in the back of his drop, takes a hitch, and guys are still running, too. So that goes back to play calling, Chip Kelly, things like that. We'll see if those change. But anyway,
and so that's what we're going to find out here with Greg Olsen and see what's going to look different. And he's done it before. He's done it 3 different times for the Raiders as regular OC or as an interim OC. And his hair is outstanding, and he's got great product in there. And I look forward, So I look forward to seeing how that's going to go. But like, we're very focused on the offensive line players not playing.
Yeah.
I think Dante Thornton has proved at least for right now, he can't play with what Chip Kelly was doing.
No, yeah.
Will Greg Olsen have something different to find ways to get him the ball in ways that he can do it? That's the question. Because there was so much during training camp about Geno Smith talking about Dante Thornton and them working the deep balls, and and it's just not there. And even, you go back to Denver right before halftime. The Raiders, Dante Thornton had the offensive pass interference call that took away a 4th and 1 touchdown to Trey Tucker.
Yeah.
And then, you get the ball back right before halftime, and they have some time to take some shots. And Gino put a beautiful go route right down the sideline. It hit Dante in the shoulders, over his shoulder, and he dropped it.
Yeah.
And so I think Dante Thornton, I really want him to succeed. But unlike Jack Besh, where we only ever see him really in routes where he's going to, it's running plays,
Yeah.
Dante Thornton's been involved in pass plays, and he's proven, at least for right now, he can't. So I want to see what Jack Besh can do. And then I think we all want to see what the offensive line can or can't do.
Yeah, I think for me too with Jack Besh is like the curious thing for me, and I get they bring in Lockett for the safety blanket and all that stuff, but to me, Jack Besh's game, at least the way they used him, throughout training camp and all that stuff, was in that Jacoby Myers role. Exactly, yeah. And so when he was sent packing, I thought, okay, we're going to see a healthy helping of Jack Besh. That obviously hasn't come to fruition.
Well, and I wonder too, Jesse, sorry to cut you off there, but I wonder as well, like, Kirk Morrison does not love referencing PFF stats.
Yeah.
And he is not someone who loves those things.
Yeah.
But he does reference Jacoby Myers before we traded him. He was, I believe, either dead last or second to last in separation while with the Raiders this year. Yeah. And so you would think that at least Jack Besh has a little bit of edge on that. But again, I don't know that we've seen enough routes to know that.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. And I'm just real curious to see how it ends up playing out now with Ole, in charge. And again, given where the season's at, I forget who it was. I think it was Ryan McFadden from ESPN asked Pete, in a sense of like, hey, given where things are at 2-9, do you now start to turn the page to look at, the playing the rookies and things like that? And that obviously, again, the answer he gave was like, we'll look at everything, see where we're at. Obviously,
but
go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, he has consistently said that, like, he wants to win now.
Yeah,
which is fine. Which is fine. Like, but like I think he should. But like, he's still going to want to win now. No coach wants to go 3-14. He's never gone 3-14.
Yeah.
But you're not winning now with the guys you have out there, and you're not even close. Like, that's the other part, right? Like, I think they still see how competitive they were with Denver and Jacksonville and Chicago and how many games his team should have won.
Yeah.
But they weren't competitive with Dallas, and they're not competitive with Cleveland, and that's a major problem.
Yeah, and well, so the question to that, though, is like, obviously, again, Pete wants to win now, and totally understand that, and every fan out there wanted them to win now this year. Obviously, in hindsight, we're sitting here at 2-9 for the Raiders. Can you have that same mindset where you're like, win now, but also build to the future? Can you do both at the same time?
Yeah, the hard part, and I've always found this hard, because so when it comes to like the draft, because like fan bases are going to talk about, hey, what if we get the number 2 pick or 3 pick? Because they all want a quarterback, right? We've heard how, and I think unfairly criticized Gino for this year. Now, the interceptions in the September, some of that was certainly fair. But over the last month and a half, like I don't put as much on Gino as the fan base does. But like, this team obviously needs a quarterback for the future. But there's just so many other things they need.
Yeah.
And, we could talk about how much offensive line they need. How many receivers do you need? How many starters on defense do you need, right? From particularly in the back half, but certainly up front too. So like, you don't know, especially with the way that this team is drafted for 20 years. We just talked about it. You don't know if the guy you drafted 3 is going to be good or 9 or 12. So I don't worry about the draft. And none of the guys here are going to worry about the draft because none of these guys know if they're going to be here next year. So they don't care what the Raiders are going to draft. The coaching staff probably needs to think about it a little bit, but they don't know if they're going to be here. So they have to try and win now. So the answer to your question is they have to try and win now. But the front office and the ownership has also got to be thinking, okay, how do we do that? But also try to stay ahead of the Jets, the Saints, the Browns for the possibility of a quarterback.
Yeah. Anytime teams are in this, mode, it's the most like excruciatingly fascinating thing to watch because it's like the coaches and everybody in that building does want to win right now, but there is also that game in the back of your mind, much like they play that same game the fans do. The fans just do it much sooner than they all do,
Of course they do.
So it's like, you're like, hey, we're going to come out here and try and win on Sunday. And then as soon as the game is over, then we sit back and think, damn it, we won. Obviously not in the Raiders case recently, but damn it, we won. And now look at what that did to our draft stock. Again, just real curious to see how things go down the stretch for them here. And obviously the Chargers are up next. I do want to get to that game real quick here before we get you out of here.
Wait, but go back to a second. Are you getting the sense, Jesse? Are you getting the sense that, like, look, if you include Ashton Genty, you have one second rounder, three third rounders, and a fourth rounder. So six, we'll call it top round ish guys, and one and a half are playing.
Yeah.
So are you getting the sense that over the course of the final 6 games, it's going to be 6 out of 6 are playing?
I for whatever reason, and this is a conversation I've had so many times, they refuse to play the offensive linemen, Grant and Caleb Rogers. I think we see Caleb. I don't think we see Charles Grant. I think we see Caleb at some point here. I think that's kind of reached a boiling point. Not that us in the media make things happen, but their questions have been asked so many times. There's no way that those same conversations aren't being had upstairs as well. I think we see him soon, just given how bad it's been on the offensive line. Again, don't think we see Charles Grant.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other part too, is it's been really bad, and we talk about the interior.
Yeah.
But it's not like the edges have been great either.
No, yeah.
And Stone's obviously a guy that Pete knows really well. And there have been times this year where I think Stone has held his own. That clearly did not hold water against the greatest defensive player in the NFL.
Exactly.
And so that was, but DJ's had struggles. So, DJ's still young too, right? He was a 3rd round pick last year.
Yeah.
Right. And people were impressed with him in camp, and he had an okay rookie year, right? And as a 3rd round pick. So I think you're still looking to see because he's a young tackle, so he still needs reps too. I don't know that we don't see Charles Grant. It's interesting that we've spent as much time talking about Caleb Rogers as we have this entire season because of the injuries on the inside. But Charles Grant has been the one who has been active every week since Colton Miller went down, not Caleb Rogers.
Very good.
And so
point.
I think that's more interesting that maybe we do see Charles Grant before Caleb Rogers.
Yeah, and look, I mean, the struggles with DJ have been very apparent. I think he's regressed, and I think he's got a lot of tools to work with, but for whatever reason, it just hasn't quite clicked. And so I am curious to see how the change in offensive coordinator and maybe game flow of how they call things impacts him. One thing on Stone, too, I think, he got dunked on by everybody when they signed him. I think he has fared much better than fans anticipated he would, particularly in the running game. They have no idea, they haven't run it as much, but I believe it was prior to the Cowboys game, and I haven't gone back and looked at this again since then, but he was top 8 in the NFL in run block win rate. So just in terms of run blocking, he had done pretty well. I always love saying those run block win rate. It's so much fun to say. I'm sure you enjoy saying it on the air.
RBRW? No, I didn't even get that right.
Stuff.
RBWR?
Yeah, that stuff is horrible. Whoever named those stats sucks. But yeah.
But that's the thing though. To your point, he's fared better than fans would have thought, and I actually think he's been. As one person within the organization told me a couple of weeks ago, if you take the offensive line as a whole, post Jackson Powers Johnson going down, the only person that they thought was playing well enough to say this guy could be playing on the offensive line next year was Stone Forsythe.
Yeah,
and again, that's not someone directly related to plays or calls or anything like that, but he was, to your point, playing better. But the fan base didn't care, and the offensive line has been such a struggle that it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's easy to cover it with a blanket and say everybody sucks, and he's had his issues, but I think he has played better than what many expected. The other one too, just in terms of the young guys, since we're on all this, the one that's been real curious to me, the usage of it, is Darian Porter. They obviously rotated him and Kyu Blue Kelly. The usage between the two of them has been weird. Obviously, Kai played a lot more, and Kai's a young guy too, so let's not forget that.
Yep.
But to me, Darian Porter was every bit the Pete Carroll pick from the outside looking in, and for whatever reason, he just hasn't had the opportunities. And from the eye test, when I have seen him out there, I thought he's played pretty well, played well enough to continue to play, and it just hasn't quite been there.
Yeah. He's an interesting one too, because not only is he young in terms of he's in his first year in the NFL, he didn't play a lot in college. He was a wide receiver at Iowa State for the first 2 or 3 years, converted to corner. I don't think he played actual corner more than a few snaps until his final year at Iowa State. He was a special teams guy. Yeah. And I believe he holds the record for most block kicks in Big 12 history. But he didn't really play starting role until I want to say he was a 6th-year senior. I forget. Maybe he was just a 5th-year senior, but he didn't play. And so not only are you talking about not getting a ton of reps at corner in the NFL, he didn't have a ton of reps in college.
Yeah.
So that's another guy that your development of is really important. And Caillou's had good moments.
Yeah.
I think Caillou's first 2 or 3 weeks in the NFL were, well, week 3 was a disaster for everybody, but first 2 weeks were good. He had some really good moments, but he's struggled as this year has gone on. And that's why he was benched against Dallas and Darian came on. And I think we saw a lot more Darian on Sunday against Cleveland than we did Caillou Bukele.
Yeah, the issue with Kai, was the chunk plays. We've seen that too many times with him,
Mm-hmm.
and I love the kid's game, and it's been tough to watch at times when there is a chunk plays involved. But the other thing too, I'm curious to see the usage of the young D lineman. We talk about it on offense. I thought that's been strange. We haven't really seen JJ Pegues much, and then Tonka, he gets a lot of time, and then he's inactive for this game. So again, just kind of juggling the usage of those guys there as well. But I do want to get to the Chargers real quick here as we close it out, Jason. For them, again, like we said, they're sitting at, I believe, 7-4, coming off of that blowout loss to the Jags. How do you wrap your head around them and the position that they're in right now? They don't seem like the same Chargers team that we saw in, what was that, week 2? But still a very dangerous group, even with all the injuries.
So they are banged up, right? I mean, and you lose Rashawn Slater, 3 days after you give him a major contract extension in training camp, and he's lost for the year. Joe Alt gets hurt early, he comes back, and then he gets hurt again, and now he's having ankle surgery, and he's out for the year. So you have 2 Pro Bowl caliber tackles who are both gone, and you're trying your best to replace them. And they traded for Trevor Penning at the deadline, a former first-round pick of the Saints, who was okay-ish, but had, clearly the Saints didn't love him. Otherwise, you're not trading a first-round pick for a 6th-round draft pick, right? Yep. So, but they plug him in at left tackle, and Justin Herbert has been under pressure more than any quarterback, I believe, in the AFC. Under probably Geno's probably up there now, but so they are struggling to figure out ways to protect. But I think they've gotten some interesting production. It's not just the offensive line that they're missing guys. They don't have any running backs. Kamani Vidal has really come on and been interesting for them. The second-year player out of Troy, who has had it's basically every other week that he's been productive. 1 week he'll have 30 yards, and the next week he'll have 130 yards, and then 1 week he'll have 40 yards, and the next week he has 120 from scrimmage. So it's been every other week. This is the week that he's on pace for 130. And that's unfortunate because the last game against the Jaguars, he was absolutely held in check. But, they lost Omarion Hampton. He is eligible to come back. I believe he went back to practice yesterday. So Omarion Hampton's a guy we may see. They lost 2 other running backs, including Najee Harris for the year, and Hassan Haskins, who's a Jim Harbaugh guy from Michigan. So they lost those guys. So they've been struggling there. They have some guys in the front 7 who have been hurt. That's part of the reason they traded for Odafe Owe from Baltimore and sent Alohi Gilman to the Ravens, and it's worked out for both teams. So I think a couple of things. You have to be able to get pressure to take advantage of an offensive line that's not very good.
Yeah.
I hope we're able to do that. I'm not positive that we can. So that's A. With regards to Keenan Allen and Quentin Johnston and Ladd McConkey, I think that's going to be a challenge for our back end. And then 3, you could look at their front 7 and be like, okay, are they dominating up front? Are they getting a ton of sacks? The answer is not really. Khalil Mack was hurt. We saw that happened week 2, right? He had that what looked like could be a season-ending elbow injury. It's not. He came back. But you've got those guys. But can our offensive line hold up? And I don't know the answer to that. They don't have, quote-unquote, Myles Garrett. Khalil Mack, at this point of his career, is still a really good player. He's not Myles Garrett. Yeah. But we've seen guys who haven't been productive in their seasons come out against the Raiders and really, have really good games. So I'd be very interested as much to see how Greg Olsen and Pete Carroll are going to design this offense to protect Geno Smith, run the football, and get Brock Bowers the ball. And if you can do those 2 things, they have a chance to at least stay in this ballgame.
Yeah, no, and I agree. I think the Chargers, too, not a great run defense, this year. So there is an opportunity to do that. Their whole thing has been sitting back. Jesse Minter sits that too high shell, keeps everything in front of them. So real curious to see if they can get it done. I think if you were a fantasy owner of Ashton Genty, this would very likely be the week to pick him up or play him at least, even though I know it's been bad.
Well, he had 20. I mean, listen, he had 20 fantasy points in a half point PPR.
Yeah.
On the positive of us throwing so much, he's got 14 catches the last 2 weeks, which is a big number for running backs, and he had a touchdown.
Very true.
I go back to what we talked about maybe 20 minutes ago. I still believe that Ashton Genty, this is not going to be a draft pick that we go back and be like, oh my God, I can't believe they took him 6th overall.
Yeah.
I truly believe they are going to find, not this year, obviously, but they are going to draft heavy offensive line.
Yeah.
It has to happen. The offensive line has been poor for 3 years, and they haven't addressed it enough, right? You say they addressed it, but clearly it was not good enough, right? Jackson Powers-Johnson, DJ Glaze, 2 third-rounders this year. You would say that you addressed it heavily the last 2 years. That's 4 players in the top 3 rounds in the last 2 years, but they're clearly not good enough.
Yeah.
And they're going to go back into it. They're going to invest in it more. They're going to have to, because you've had the worst running team over the last 2 years combined, and that's including taking a dynamite running back. Yeah. So they're going to have to figure that part out. And I still think over the next 3 years, we're going to talk about Ashton Genty as a top 5 running back. It's just not this year.
Yeah, I think it's one of those deals where it's once they do figure that out, then it's like, oh, this is why
he's going to explode. As long as he stays healthy, he is going to explode.
Yeah, for the sake of roster building, you just hope it's before you have to give him a big payday to keep him here. But
that's right.
That's right. Figure out a way to build it up while he's on this rookie deal for sure. Man, Jason, I say this every single time that we have you on. I could sit here and do a full 3 hours with you every time. I always enjoy.
Should we let people know that we actually talked a half hour before you even hit record?
I know, that's the funny part. If only we could record that and release that podcast, that might be even better. Jason, you're the man. As always, I appreciate your time so much. We'll have to do it again soon.
Yeah, you got it, Jesse. See you, bud.
All right, shout out to Jason. He wasn't kidding. We actually chopped it up for well over half an hour before we got rolling. If you guys don't listen to him on the call during the game, I really do encourage you to check him out. He and Kirk Morrison, they really do a great job over the airwaves on game day, and they're both just genuinely good dudes as well. So with that, though, that is going to do it for our look ahead to the future for the Raiders. Now let's bring it back to the present and dive into this week's matchup against the Chargers. Again, for this one, we're chopping it up with Chris Hayre from CBS out there in LA. He also does the Chargers Weekly podcast, and he's on the road with the team all year as well. So he's got as good of a pulse on the Chargers as anyone else out there does. And this, again, was another fun time. Take a listen. All right, Chris, so we got Raiders and Chargers coming up, round 2 for this season. Obviously, for the Chargers, it's a little bit of an interesting situation for them. They're coming in at 7-4, coming off the bye week, and a blowout loss to the Jags. I'm just curious, before we really start diving into the Chargers and kind of what they're looking like, what's your just take on what they're taking away from that game against the Jags?
Well, you know what? I think it kind of came as a shock to everybody, just the manner in which they lost. They were coming off a 3-game winning streak, a pretty dominant game, especially defensively against the Pittsburgh Steelers on Sunday Night Football. And, they will never make an excuse, but I look at just how the season and even training camp started. You start a week before everybody else. You have a Hall of Fame game. You go to Brazil week 1. Week 2, you're in Vegas. You don't even have a home game at SoFi till week 3. And these guys have been on the East Coast multiple times already. They lost to the Giants on the East Coast. They kind of stubbed their toe against the Titans before pulling that one out. Pulled one out against the Dolphins on the East Coast. And then obviously you saw the result a couple Sundays ago against the Jags. So it was just bad all around. Really, all 3 phases. Maybe Justin Herbert's worst game as a Charger, 81 passing yards. The time of possession, they possessed the ball for like 22 minutes in that game. So I don't know if that's a game you just kind of throw out and say, okay, that was not our day. Let's move forward. But for those guys to have to sit with that for a couple of weeks, they're going to be champing at the bit to beat whoever is next on their schedule. It just happens to be the Raiders.
Yeah, no, I was talking to Jason Horowitz, who's the radio voice for the Raiders, and he was saying, he's like, man, the Raiders can't catch a break because now they're getting a really pissed off Chargers team coming off of that performance, especially and off of a bye after they've had time to sit back and kind of correct it. And I'm curious on that note, what are some of the things that you think they're sitting back throughout that bye week looking at saying like, okay, hey, these are the areas that we need to correct the most for this stretch run for them?
Well, it starts with the offensive line, and that's kind of been the topic of conversation all year. It's one thing to lose Rashawn Slater, who just signed that huge deal, and then just a few days later goes out, just a crushing blow to the offensive line. And then you lose Joe Alt, but Joe Alt comes back, and then you lose him again, in Tennessee, and now he's not coming back. So you have perhaps the best kind of tackle tandem in the NFL gone, and they have just been. It's been tough sledding. I mean, there's really no bones about it in terms of protecting Justin Herbert. He's been getting hit way too much. And I don't know what the right formula is in terms of like what the starting lineup is even going to look like on Sunday. You know, Trevor Penning, they traded for. He started at left tackle in Jacksonville. They've gotten guys like Bobby Hart off the streets who may be coming back as well. So I don't know what the offensive line is going to look like on Sunday, but that's one thing like you can correct, but to a point. Like you're not going to get Alton Slater production throughout the last 6 weeks of the season. I think another area is just kind of the run defense. 192 yards they allowed to the Jags a couple of Sundays ago. And they've had games, man, where like I go back to week 6 in Miami where Achane breaks off like a 50-yard run. Just on the edges of being kind of an issue. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt in week 5 kind of had his way. So the run defenses look very stout at times, and other times teams have kind of had their way. So, if I'm Jim Harbaugh and company during the bye, I'm probably figuring out, all right, what can we do to, A, keep Justin upright, and B, put together an offense where we can get the ball in the hands of playmakers and score some points. And I think getting Omarion Hampton back, whether it's this Sunday or beyond, Coach Harbaugh just announced as we taped this that they opened his 21-day window. So we may see Omarion Hampton, the rookie running back who was awesome before he got hurt. That'll help alleviate some problems across the offensive line.
Yeah, and kind of to that note, I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to go there with Omarion. Like, how different does this group look with Omarion? And I know it was a different group up on the offensive line when he was healthy, but how much of an impact do you think he makes for that group? And in terms of like what the Raiders have to watch out for in trying to stop him?
Well, considerable. And again, if he's 100% healthy and you get a full strength Omarion Hampton, that's a great advantage for the Chargers against any opponent. It's been tough because during the offseason you visualize Alton Slater and then Omarion Hampton and Najee Harris kind of spelling each other and wearing teams down in the fourth quarter. We talked about Slater and Alt. Week 3 against the Broncos, Najee Harris pops his Achilles. The most durable back in football, who would have thunk it? He comes to LA in week 3 and is out for the year. And then, Omarion Hampton didn't miss a game in North Carolina, gets hurt a couple of Sundays later. So it's just the running game has not been what they were expecting. But that said, like Kimani Vidal has really come in, somebody who was cut, comes back, was on the practice squad, gets elevated, and has made the most of his opportunity. He's filled in very admirably for Omarion, but Omarion's just different. He's just a different dude. He's a physical runner. He's fast. We didn't see much of him week 2 against the Raiders. So that was a game where I think that, Greg Roman was really relying on Justin Herbert's arm through the first 3 weeks of the season. So I do think with the way that the offensive line looks right now, I think Omarion can really help, keep the possessions into favor of the Chargers, time of possession rather, favoring the Chargers and sustain drives. And that's a guy, if they are going to make the postseason, Jesse, he's going to have to play a big role these last 6 weeks.
No, definitely. And obviously the other element for the Chargers is that passing game. A lot of weapons there, but they've kind of struggled to generate explosive pass plays, it seems, from the outside looking in. Where do you think the biggest issue has been in that regard for them of getting the passing attack going?
Well, I think it starts with the offensive line, being able to hold long enough for Justin to get the ball down the field. They don't have a true like burner type wide receiver right now. I mean, Quentin Johnson can fill that role. Quentin had a really hot start to the year. Yeah. He's cooled off as of late. They have a lot of weapons though. Like, I always look at it when you play a team twice, right? Week 2 versus week 13, both teams are going to look totally different. There's going to be guys that you didn't see in week 2 that you're going to see in week 13. And I think Oronde Gadsden is another one, the tight end who was a 5th-round pick out of Syracuse, obviously the son of Oronde Gadsden, who played wide receiver for the Miami Dolphins for a number of years. And he's been a security blanket for Justin Herbert. He had a really cool – it was just it was really cool to see him kind of come into his own as a 5th-round pick and just be as dominant as he was for like a 3-week stretch. So he's a tight end to look out for. But as far as like a burner, they don't have like this 4-3 guy that's going to take the top off the defense. They have Keandre Lambert-Smith, who's a 5th-round pick, but they just have so many weapons right now that it didn't really make sense to activate him on most Sundays because you got Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnson, Keenan Allen, Trey Harris, the second-round rookie, who hasn't done a ton in the passing game, but he's been a heck of a blocker in the run game and has made some clutch catches. But I think just a long way to answer your question, it kind of starts with the offensive line. Being able to protect Justin Herbert, and you may not necessarily have the personnel to go like bombs away on a week-to-week basis.
Yeah, well, and we did see in that first matchup, Quentin Johnson, burst for a 60-yarder there against this Raiders defense. You better believe they're going to have him circled. Can't have that happen again. I believe it was Kyu Blu-Kelly in coverage on that one. He and Isaiah Polamalu, the safety there, I think bit and allowed that one to happen. So you better believe they're going to try and clean that up this time around, because that's a total game-changer play. One of the things that was a big factor in the previous matchup, obviously turnovers. Smith had a ton of them. I know the Chargers and Justin Herbert as a whole have kind of struggled with that, and it seems like a lot of passes are getting batted at the line of scrimmage, right, where that kind of reverts back to the protection thing. Seems like an area where Max Crosby could really disrupt things in this matchup.
Yeah, I was just talking to somebody a few minutes ago about just the three players that can wreck a game for the Raiders, and there's two guys on offense, Brock Bowers and Ashton Jeanty, and there's Max Crosby. You have to account for Max Crosby at all times. Expect him to be doubled the entire game. I don't think that the Chargers can allow those three guys to put their imprint on the football game, because I think if the Raiders do win this game, it's going to be because Brock Bowers was targeted 15 times and Ashton Jeanty broke off a couple big plays, or Max Crosby has like 3 or 4 sacks. So those are the three guys that the Chargers will have circled. And you talk about Max Crosby, man. He has a history of wrecking this division, and with no Joe Alt and no Rashawn Slater, there's going to have to be a game plan for him for sure.
Yeah, no, I'd imagine so. And for you, if you're Greg Roman back there calling the plays, I mean, how do you go about trying to attack this Raiders defense then to get some success going there for the Chargers?
Well, they're going to have to max protect in certain situations and obviously account for Max Crosby. What they did against the Steelers was, I thought, really smart. They got the ball out of Justin's hands very quickly. Kimani Vidal was able to kind of help sustain drives, and I think he had a 95 rushing yards and a touchdown in that game. So, they're going to have to run the football, whether it's with Amarian Hampton or Kimani Vidal. But I think that this will be a game where they try to showcase Justin Herbert a little bit, and hopefully the offensive line can hold up. Because you mentioned guys like Quentin Johnson. I mean, if you go back to Week 18 of last year, Quentin Johnson's numbers against the Raiders, he had like that 13 catch, I want to say like 186-yard performance. So Quentin has done pretty well against Vegas, and I do expect Greg Roman to kind of get this offense into a rhythm early and often, and then maybe that play action pass can set up some big plays to McConkey and Quentin and company.
Yeah, the Raiders fans definitely have PTSD when it comes to Quentin Johnson. They're trying to avoid a big performance from him again. You mentioned it offensively for the Raiders. They do have two guys that teams always have to circle, and that's Brock Bowers and Ashton Jeanty. Now, the Raiders just fired Chip Kelly, so obviously a mix-up in terms of the play caller. Greg Olson's going to be calling the shots back there for him, and Pete Carroll has made it very clear that he wants to see them run the football better. Obviously, the Chargers, you noted, and the numbers are out there. They've struggled to stop the run. Why do you think that have been the case for them so far?
It's hard to say because you've seen some games where they look very dominant against the run, and then other ones where I guess you'll see those numbers, and that's kind of why they're probably towards the bottom of the league in terms of run defense. I don't know their exact ranking as we tape this, but it's been a challenge. 192 yards the Jags allowed with ETN and Tootin, the rookie runner from Virginia Tech. I mentioned guys like Achane and Krosky Merritt. They've had trouble on the edges, right? And I think when you bring in a guy like Odafe Owe and you get Khalil Mack back, that will help, and that has helped. I want to know who this Chargers team is, right? And I think these next 6 weeks we will figure out what kind of defense they are. Can they stop the run on a consistent basis? And don't allow teams to kind of beat you on the outside. That's kind of what we've seen throughout the course of the 2025 season.
Yeah, no, I mean, and if I'm the Raiders, I try to attack those edges for sure in the run game with Jeanty. I mean, I know, Pete talks about wanting to be a downhill team, but get Jeanty involved on the edges there. In terms of everything outside of, stopping the run, passing game wise, like how have they looked in terms of that area? Because like Jesse Minter obviously likes to sit back in that too high shell. Where have they had the most success in that this year, you think?
Well, they've just been very sound. Like they're a very sound defense. Like when they're humming, it's like Jesse Minter puts these guys in the right positions to be successful. It's partly why they were able to trade Alohi Gilman for Adafe Owe to the Baltimore Ravens, get some extra edge help. When Joey Bosa left in free agency, getting after the quarterback was a little bit of a challenge when Khalil got hurt in that game against the Raiders in week 2. You get Khalil back, and now you have this kind of three-headed attack, and you can add Bud Dupree to that mix too. But just the back end has been sounded. It starts with Derwin James. I'm sure we're going to see a lot of Derwin James on Brock Bowers in this game. Tarheeb still was hurt for a couple of weeks, came back against the Jags, and like I said, you almost kind of have to throw that game out and kind of see where the secondary looks. Dante Jackson has been a key free agent signing from the Pittsburgh Steelers, had a big interception in each of the last 2 games. The rookie R.J. Mickens from Clemson, a pair of picks in 2 primetime games this year as well. So they've been able to kind of keep things in front of them, like you said. There's been a few broken plays throughout the course of the season, but by and large, Jesse Minter has done really good things with this defense over the last 2 seasons. But we have seen some of those cracks, and you hope that guys like Bowers and Genty don't get going.
Yeah, and I'm curious for you because, like, obviously, like we noted in that first matchup, we did see them sit back in that too high shell, confuse Geno a bit with some of the coverage looks they gave him in a few of those picks. I think 2 of them were on like a dagger concept that they were running offensively. Do you think they try and come with that same approach? Like, have they been comfortable sitting back in there? Do you think they try and stop the run after hearing what Pete Carroll has to say about switching the coordinator and really wanting to run the ball?
Well, it's a great question, and I think that it's really it comes down to being able to adjust. Like we'll see how the Raiders come out, but if I'm not mistaken, that week 2 game they got their hands on the football like a ton. Like they a lot of pass breakups. Geno looked like he was trying to maybe force the ball in certain situations, and the Chargers secondary, the pass deflections were certainly there on that Monday night. So yeah, I mean they're going to have, like I said, Ashton Genty is a guy that you always have to account for. I don't know. I don't know how they're going to come out, but I know that if Pete is saying they want to run the football and you don't try to stop the run to start the game, then it's probably not a great look. So I would say that they try to limit Genty, make sure Brock Bowers doesn't beat you, and then let Geno try to beat you with anybody else but those 2 guys. I'd be interested to see, like, from your perspective with Geno, like where has the issue been this year? Because we saw such solid play in Seattle, and that's what I was expecting, frankly. I was expecting to see Geno kind of lead this team to an 8-9 win season, and for whatever reason, it just seems like he has not looked comfortable all year long.
No, and I think honestly that's what we all kind of thought. We thought they would probably be in that like 6 to 8 or 9 win range, and nobody expected Geno to regress quite as much as he has. It's been crazy, and I think a lot of it, sitting back there's been a lot of, double clutching, going through his reads, sometimes even staring guys down. And like he's a guy that's going to try and throw into tight windows, but he just, I don't think has the personnel offensively this year to be able to do that. Now, obviously they traded Jacoby Myers, so he's not there from the first matchup, but outside of him, they didn't have a receiver that you could really rely upon. Now, even more so, they have Tyler Lockett and then a couple of rookies that aren't really playing a ton, and then it's obviously Brock Bowers. So for that matchup, the first time around, Brock wasn't healthy, and he was in and out of the lineup, for so long, and then missed, I think it was 3 games if memory serves me right. So I just think, not to give him a pass by any means, but the personnel isn't really quite there in the receiving core outside of a Brock Bowers, again, obviously. And then, much like you said for Herbert, the protection hasn't really been there. So it's like, when there has been time, Geno gets sacked. When, again, he's sitting back there holding onto the ball a bit too long, and even at times, again, staring some receivers down. It's like almost been a mix of everything. And much like Herbert has had some issues with passes getting tipped, Geno has too, so it's been tough because, like, fans, you know how it is. Like, fans go nuts at the quarterback anytime there's an interception. They've all been going after Geno all year long, asking for him to be benched since, like, week 3 or 4. I think he deserves a bit of a pass in some areas, but needs to be much better in terms of some of his reads and not, holding onto the ball for too long and just, I guess, trusting his instincts. So that's been the biggest thing I think that stood out to me is, like, Geno just not necessarily trusting the group around him and not having the protection there, I think has been his biggest problem.
And it kind of dovetails into I really do think the key to the game in this is just the offensive lines, both offensive lines. I mean,
Yeah.
the Raiders gave up 10 sacks to Myles Garrett and company last Sunday. We've talked about the Chargers' offensive line every single week and just how many times Justin Herbert has been hit. Even if it's not Max Crosby, just being able to keep number 10 upright and not get hit, because he's been getting hit at an alarming rate. And I almost think that for Justin, like we talk about the running game with Kimani Vidal and Amari and Hampton, I almost think Justin is safer running the football. And he's been very, like, when he runs the ball, it does open up the offense. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see kind of all things Justin on Sunday, throwing the ball, kind of trying to pull out all stops, everything in the arsenal. And also those design runs, because those design runs really open things up for this offense. And I think for the Chargers, that offense, again, it's going to be Amari and Hampton to kind of help them maybe get to the postseason. But Justin is going to have to put on this otherworldly performance over November and December for them to, get in the postseason and then actually maybe do some damage in the postseason.
Yeah, no, I mean, it does seem like that cliche, like the game that's going to be won in the trenches type of thing. Like we know what Harbaugh and Roman actually want to do, and that fits their style 100%. But both these offensive lines really beat up and dealing with a ton of protection issues. I mean, now for the Raiders, they've given up 20 sacks in the last 3 games, just an unreal number. Yeah, and like multiple times up at the press box for the last game, I'm sitting up there looking at Q Myers, who does Raider Nation Radio out here, and we're sitting there talking to each other, thinking like, man, like, Gino's going to get hurt behind that offensive line. And so I'm sure for Herbert, too, like you said, get him out running and do those things, because he is such a problem in the running games. He's a big body.
Yeah, he's a big body, and he's had these kind of chunk runs that are really deflating for opposing defenses. When he gets out of the pocket and rushes for 26 yards. And I mean, I remember week 1 before that Raiders game against the Chiefs, that 19-yard rush to ice the game and that slide. And it's almost like shades of Rose Bowl Justin Herbert when he ran all over Pasadena. But I do think that Justin is going to have to elevate his game and carry this team to the playoffs, because their stretch after the Raiders, man, is not easy. You got Monday Night Football against the Eagles, short week, go to Kansas City, then you go to Dallas, then you have the Houston Texans and that defense at SoFi before you play the Denver Broncos in Week 18, which may or may not mean anything. So it's definitely a difficult stretch for the Chargers to close the year, and that's why this is a absolute must-win to get to 8-4 and kind of stay with the 3 other teams that are outside the playoffs right now. Like you have to stay above the Chiefs, you have to stay above the Texans, and you have the Jags who now have that head-to-head tiebreaker against you. Yep. So there's really little room for error right now.
No, definitely. And, the Raiders would obviously love nothing more than to come in there and play the spoiler, especially against a team like the Chargers where there's no love lost, that's for sure. Chris, man, we really appreciate it. This has been fun. I can sit here and talk ball with you for quite a while, but I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Before we do get you out of here, though, let the folks at home know where they can find your work, what you got cooking, if they do want to do a little bit more recon on the Chargers leading up to the matchup.
I mean, I appreciate it. I'm over at CBS Los Angeles. You can follow me on Instagram or Twitter at Chris Hayre. So do a lot of stuff with the Chargers, but really all things Southern California sports. And we also host our Chargers Weekly podcast. I do that with Matt Money Smith, the voice of the Chargers, and former Chargers safety Jaleel Adai, who's played in those Chargers-Raiders rivalries. So we're going to tape tomorrow and get fans set for that matchup on Sunday. But I really appreciate your time, man. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Thanks, dude. Happy Thanksgiving and enjoy the rest of your week.
All right, man. You too.
Hey, again, if you guys live in LA, check out Sports Central with Chris and Darren Haynes. I'll be honest, I'm a KBC guy at heart and love the homies Kurt Sandoval and Rob Fukuzaki. I actually worked with them for years before actually starting my on-air career in the TV biz. But Darren and Chris are also two of the best in the business. They crank out some great content on every single sport out there in LA, all those teams. So do check them out. And also, again, continue to support, Kurt and Rob over there at KBC. Good dudes as well. But anyway, guys, that is going to do it for us here today. Thanks again for watching and listening each and every week. We appreciate it. I hope you guys have a great Thanksgiving with all your friends and family. And we will catch you on Friday with our next installment of Raiders Rounders. In the meantime, take it easy, guys.